Look, I know you may not be inclined to listen to all your Arsenal podcasts during the interlull, and I know you may not be inclined certainly to listen all the way through the Arsenal podcast during the interlull, but you are not going to believe the news we have broken in this podcast today at around the 59th minute mark. This is the ArsenalVision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, the Blackman Twitter Gunner. At the 59th minute of this hour-long podcast, we break some unbelievable news. And the only way to get there is to listen all the way through from now till then. I wish that wasn't the case. I'd love to give you your day back, but that's the only way to do it. And if you're asking why didn't we break it in the first minute, we wanted to, believe me, we wanted to, but the jam-packed itinerary was such that we just couldn't make it happen. So I did the thing I do. I listened to the Arscast. I'm like, haha, now I can get my ideas. And all I know now is that there is apparently a theme park for dump trucks in the UK. Like that's what I know. It was the most prodigious podcasting effort of nonstop waffle that I have ever heard, and I just want to applaud James and Andrew for the work that they have done. So, a few things. Clive had been under the weather. We wish him well. He's certainly fine. He's on the road to recovery, which is good. So he'll be on the future pod. In fact, tomorrow we will have that much ballyhooed Ivan Toney and Pedro Neto scouting video. We have a really fun concept for the very end of the week for Friday, right before the Chelsea game. We'll have our main pod on Thursday as well. So normal service hopefully restored. A little bit different service here today. So first, we have Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pause My Pants. I'll pause.
Woohoo!
And we have a returning guest, a second stint on the ArsenalVision podcast, a man who has performed for the Arsenal glitterati, the Arsenal fans celebrate at key Arsenal occasions and around the UK, a stand-up comedian, but more importantly, an Arsenal supporter and a man who did a brilliant job last time he was on and will again today. His name is Jacob Hawley, and you can find him on Twitter at Hawley Jacob. Hello, Jacob.
Hello, how's it going?
Yeah, going about as well as it can be going when there is no Arsenal news going. Now, the good news is traditionally the interlull podcasts are usually things like, can you believe blank player tore blank muscle and will be out blank number of years due to that injury on international duty? None of that to report so far. We've got Martin Odegaard potentially not making the Euros, which means he might get a summer off. Very little else. We'll talk Eddie and Nketiah, but Paul, I've got some big breaking news for you. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I used to be an attorney. And so I am going to serve as your attorney here. We have been put on notice by the Arscast that one James McNicholas has officially applied for and been granted intellectual property rights to the phrase, "Les do this." It is now his trademark. He owns it. And as such, I implore you not to use it in any capacity on this fine program, which I must remind everyone is a legal entity of the United States of America and therefore not subject to the intellectual property rights of James McNicholas in the UK. However, we wouldn't want to open Tim and Clive and certainly Jacob here to any liability. So, Paul, are you comfortable with the new state of play as I have outlined it for you?
Oh, yeah. You know how compliant I am with other people telling me not to say things. So, no, that's really held me back, and I'm fully on board. Let's do this.
I knew it was coming.
You know what I mean?
I have to say, you getting us sued for intellectual property rights transgressions would be the least bad thing I'd expect from your utterances. So I appreciate that. Jacob, could we commission you to develop an equally silly but copyrightable, trademarkable catchphrase that we could use on this podcast? I think that's desperately in need to save Paul millions and millions of pounds.
We can talk rates afterwards, Elliot. Definitely. We can talk numbers.
See, the thing is, you don't engineer these things, Elliot. That's what you never understand. The people vote with these things. The people of Latin America came up with "Les do this." James stole it. I just put enough spin, pizzazz, and sauce on it that it really caught fire. That was really my role.
So really what he's done is he's monetizing your dramatic reading of the phrase. I don't know. Let's put it this way. As your attorney, which I am clearly legally able to be, having been bar admitted many, many years ago and not subsequently, I recommend strongly that you don't engage in this behavior.
Sure. I am what Americans did to sushi, right? They took sushi, which was simple, straightforward, healthy, and they lashed all that stuff all over it, and they made dragon rolls and muck all over the top to make it spicy and palatable to the
deep fried and rolled in sauce and all the good things that we're known for. Yes, yes, you are the deep fried rolled in sauce version of Les Dudas. But as I stated earlier, we will not be crossing that line again. Jacob,
I'm with you. Let's do this.
You know what I'm going to do? For the YouTube version of this pod, we're going to have a ticker that's just a dollar figure, and every time you say it, we're going to have the dollar figure this pod owes James, and see how rich it gets for us, paying off James for that. By the way, speaking of dollar figures toting up, we will have some news on the fundraiser. It's not till April as usual, but the fundraiser that we'll be doing, and some news on that upcoming in the not too distant future as well. I'll be over for the Sheffield United game, so we're trying to work out a way to just get people together for drinks and general merriment during that time. So we'll see what happens. Jacob, let's talk about a footballing thing, if you're up for it.
Yeah,
why not? So let's start with Eddie Nketiah, because I think it's probably the story of the international break from an Arsenal standpoint that maybe matters at all, which is that Eddie Nketiah not only got a call up, but he got a cap and he got to play and he got on the pitch, because I guess Gareth Southgate forgot that he had older players available who are nearing the end of their career, and he forgot to give them more minutes. So I'm curious to just get your general take on Eddie Nketiah and where he is in his career right now, because I found myself ecstatic for him getting this opportunity, right? You want to see your academy kids get these moments. I also know that I believe Carl Jenkinson once got a call up, not that I'm equating the two from a talent standpoint. I think Eddie Nketiah is such an interesting player because, and I think this only happens with academy players in some respects, where there is a vast chasm between people who rate him and don't rate him and why and where they are. A big spectrum might be a better way to put it. Where are you on the spectrum and where he is in his career right now? And also maybe just the chance to celebrate the fact that he got to play for England, because it's a dream come true, right? And I think he should be extremely excited about that, obviously.
Yeah, I'm sure it is a dream come true. I mean, I don't know too much about it. Did he not play for Ghana at some point?
I mean, it must have been.
I'm sure he went away with them to a tournament. I don't know if he actually got on the pitch, but I remember seeing pictures of him going away with the Ghana team at some point. Anyway, I think it's great seeing him get a cap for England. I find Eddie a really difficult player to discuss and to rate and to kind of evaluate. He feels like such an old-fashioned style of striker to me, and it's interesting watching him play for England because he reminds me of English strikers from years ago. He reminds me of almost a Michael Owen, of a finisher, and so someone who perhaps would benefit in an old-fashioned 4-4-2 with someone next to him doing some of the things that he doesn't do quite so much. In terms of where he is in his career, I saw some quotes from him this week, and I'm not sure whether it was a recent interview or whether the aggregators are just kind of sticking his quotes out because he's getting this thing and because there's nothing else going on at the moment. But he sort of spoke about the decision to remain at Arsenal and where he is in the pecking order, and he seems genuinely really grateful to be at Arsenal. And there's conversations about, this is my club, this is where I grew up. I want to stay here. I want to compete for my place, and I've got to be honest, it feels strange because I think years ago, and it might just be, I don't mean this to sound like a slight on Eddie or his levels of ambition. I think years ago, if a player like Eddie, who was kind of knocking on the door for England a bit, who'd got the scoring record that he had for England's under 23s, and who definitely does have the ability to regularly score goals in the Premier League, I think years ago, if a player was in that position and they weren't, I was about to say they weren't regularly starting for Arsenal. He started nearly every game for us so far. But I think we all kind of know that as soon as Jesus and the rest of that front of three is fit, he won't be starting games for us in the middle of the pitch. I would have thought years ago that a player like that would be pushing to leave Arsenal at this point. I'd have thought that at the age, he's nearly 25 now. I'd have thought that at the age he is, he might be starting to think, I want to go somewhere. I want to establish myself as the first name on a team sheet somewhere in the Premier League and start to build a career where I'm playing regularly. He might be looking at the start of this season and going, well, I have started nearly every game. I'm starting to see Jesus play on the wing more often. Maybe he's starting to feel that this could happen for him at Arsenal. And it'd be hard to argue with him if that was the case. I do personally feel like he limits our play a little bit. I I think something we could talk about is our chance creation numbers over the first 8-9 games of the season. And I think that's one thing you can look at with us and say, if we continue like that the rest of this season, we probably won't win the league if we're continuing to create chances at this rate. And I think most of us would be optimistic that is going to improve when we get that front three back together. And I think most people would agree that it's hard to see us going on and doing what we want to do this season if we're not creating more chances than we currently are. And I think the solution to that is to put the front three back together with Martinelli, Jesus and Saka. So where does that leave Eddie? And it felt a really strange moment for me watching him get those minutes on the pitch for England, because I'm really happy for him. I love seeing an academy player do that. It felt to me like this should be the beginning of Eddie going, I'm good enough. I can get on the pitch for England. I should maybe be in a position at a club where I'm closer to the first name on the team sheet than I'm going to be at Arsenal.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. By the way, I don't show him having played for Ghana at any point. So if he did, it would have been in his youth career. I don't see it. Obviously now he's played for England, so he's an England player. Some of the quotes you mentioned, I signed a new deal at Arsenal because I love the club. London is home, but I've been an Arsenal fan all my life, and that has played a significant role. Speaking to the manager and the plans he had for me, I knew I wanted to learn, develop, and help Arsenal. And that is something you have to take into account, Paul. I mean, these are still young men. Like, at 24, you're midway through your career as a footballer, but you're still very early in your life. And if there's a part of the world that you've known, a city that you've known, a place that you've known, a club you've called home, everything from where the certain weight machines are in the gym to which direction you turn to go down the hall to get to the dressing room to, what it feels like to pull into the car park. It all just comes to be habit. And, I can remember I've made some moves in my life that were small moves, from one town to another in the same general area, and got emotional at making that move. So I can understand why a young person would want to stay at a place they love, where they grew up from a kid. By the way, making a hell of a nice wage. I mean, I think it is important to point out that Arsenal has given him a wage that is very much maybe not a top player, but a regular key player at a big club kind of wage. So now he's sort of achieved this dream of making it to the England squad. And I think one thing is if you want to play for England, you don't have to be elite at a big club. That's the difference. Like, you have to really star at a smaller club to make it for England, or just play regularly for a big club seems to be the key. And he's done that. He started 7 of 8 games for Arsenal this season. So he's in a really good moment in terms of how much he's playing and in terms of getting onto the pitch for England. Where do you see him going from here? Because I think Jacob made the point. He's halfway through his 24th year of life. This is the absolute prime of his career. If it's going to go bang, so to speak, this is the time it would. What do you expect from Eddie Nketiah going forward? Where should his career be going from here?
Yeah, it's very interesting stuff. A bit like Jacob, I'm a little surprised. Like, I thought there was a reasonable chance he would look for a move this summer. I didn't think it was odds on, but I thought there'd be a bit more rumblings, a little bit as his window maybe to be a starter narrowed a little bit, especially bringing in Havertz, who I see more as a left 8, but would play plenty of false 9, and you have Trossard there, and the much talked about Martinelli could switch at times so it seemed like there could be 3, 4, 5 guys going for that spot. But maybe the remarkable thing that there's a mismatch in is the rating of the manager for Eddie versus the rating of the supporters, the fans for Eddie, including myself. I actually think, despite the fact that I'm very much in the Eddie booster camp, that Arteta likes him more than I do as an Arsenal striker. He just really rates him and his contribution. I think as the filler guy, the squad guy who's always fair play to Eddie, right? He's basically always fit, always available. Now he's always fit for 70 minutes, but he's always fit. And so, like, no matter what's going on in the squad, obviously he works great in training. He's part of the team. He does all the things Arteta wants. What he does on the pitch, even when he's not scoring and assisting, Arteta likes more than we do. I mean, you'll see him at the end of games recently where him and Arteta are having moments, right? They'll celebrate at the end of a game, and like the look of, there's a mutuality about like, that went just the way we thought it should, or like there's just something between those two guys that they're on the same wavelength. And when you hear about one or two other players who've kind of drifted out of the squad, and they'll say, Arteta didn't really talk to me. The staff did, blah, blah, blah. But you could read it as they were kind of out of the loop. So Arteta has a group of people he thinks are tuned in, dialed in, get the message, drink the Kool-Aid, are on the program. And then you see players that kind of drift off because they're not getting it, they're not feeling it, they're not quite on the right wavelength. Well, Eddie's right on his wavelength. And if you look at it from Southgate's point of view, there will be many, many games where England are dominant in playoffs, friendlies, etc., which are all significant. And it's significant to him anyway, maybe not always to the rest of us. And they'll have lots of possession. They'll have the ball in the box and they need a finisher, and Eddie will make even more sense. And when that's not the game, he'll work his ass off. He knows the systems. He knows the most modern versions of football, and knows how to do a job, do a role the way that, look, what Southgate want? A guy on his wavelength. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, look, you can be happy for Eddie Nketiah and think Eddie Nketiah has gone to a great place in his career and not be convinced about him as an Arsenal player. I think the thing that is always hard, right, is trying to determine what you think of an academy player at Arsenal, stripping away the fact that you're rooting for all of them. Like Eddie, Paul, I think you hit on something really important that Reece Nelson wishes he could say. Eddie's always been fit and available to be picked right at the time when the opportunity came, right? When Jesus gets his knee injury, Eddie Nketiah is fit and available. When Lacazette's wheels came off and he had to put those Timberlands aside and step aside 2 seasons ago, Eddie Nketiah was fit and available, right? This season, when, again, Jesus was recovering from a little knee cleanup, Eddie Nketiah fit and available. Whereas Reece Nelson, where those opportunities have come, where there was a preseason to break in or a moment like at the start of last season where there was an opportunity for him to play more, he hasn't been fit and available. And so he hasn't been able to reach out and grab that opportunity with both hands in quite the same way. I don't want to overdo it on Nketiah, Jacob. One thing I will say is it's always hard to know what to do with data when a player plays as a sub. There's an expression, sub effects, right? And so substitute appearances can boost your per 90 data. And it is an interesting one with Eddie because if you look at his, everybody loves these, XG and XA, last season, really good. The season before, really pretty solid. This season, well down from where it had been. 0.29 expected goals per 90, 0.03 expected assists. By the way, the latter, a stat that Jesus usually excels at. So in terms of the creativity and the way he brings other players into the game. But the interesting thing about the data being down is these are games he's starting now, right? He's started 7 of 8 games. So we're seeing him more, as a starter. And I think, what's always funny? Think about the lineup. When the lineup comes out, who are people freaking out about? It's kind of an interesting way to do a referendum on how people feel about a player. Because I think if Rice was out for a game but Partey had to play, or if White was out for a game but Tomiyasu had to play, right? If Raya was out and Ramsdale had to play, if Martinelli's out but Trossard had to play, you can go through the lineup and think about the options. I definitely think Jesus not playing at center forward and Eddie Nketiah playing there feels like a gap. Is there a point that people need to appreciate, though, about backup players, squad players? Like, how many clubs have a second guy to play striker who's world-class also? That's not really a thing they do. So should we just take a breath?
Unfortunately, the main club that we're in competition with do have exactly that. That's the frustrating
Manchester
thing,
City
isn't it?
got 2 of everything.
Yeah, but that's where we are. That unfortunately, that's where we are. That's what we're up against now. And straight, it's one area where they do have a good alternative to Haaland, but they're not really a 22-man squad. City, they have creative ways of using a slightly smaller group of players. But I know what you're saying about feeling privileged to have Eddie as a backup. I've got to be honest, I walk into and this feels like a very long time ago now because of what happened since the final whistle of the City game, but I remember walking to the City game last week. Yeah, people didn't feel good about that lineup. There were two names on that team sheet we weren't expecting. One was Jorginho and one was Eddie. And I dare say that if it was just Jorginho playing and not Eddie, I don't think we'd have panicked quite so much. I think those two being on the lineup frightened people, and I think Eddie in those big games scares people a little bit. I don't think he feels like he can. It doesn't feel like he can really make the difference in games of that magnitude at the moment, despite the fact he's had some really good performances at home in games like that. That the Manchester United game in was it January or February last season we beat them 3-2. He was great.
Yeah, that was January. The winner, the late winner in January. Yeah.
There's a couple of things with Eddie when he's come into the team. The first thing, it was interesting what you were mentioning about the stats and when he comes on as substitute. That's been part of my issue with Eddie for a while now, is I don't think he influences games from the bench well enough for us.
Interesting.
I think that's been something that's frustrated me for a while, is that I don't know if he comes on the pitch and gives us enough of an angle. Now, the one time he has done it this season against Fulham, I think that's the best performance he's given us in a really long time. When he came on against Fulham, got the goal, and I think he really showed his physicality, the way he could run down channels in ways that Trossard wasn't doing. I thought he was excellent. The other thing I think we've seen with Eddie quite a few times now is Jesus pulls up, Eddie goes in at 9, 4-5 games where we go, oh, this is all right. He's doing things that we didn't think Eddie can do. He's dropping, he's receiving, and then it tails off. And I think Paul made the point that there seems to be a bit of a fitness thing there. We know that he's bulked up in the last couple of years. Pre-season, there's topless pictures where he looks like he's spent 6 weeks just bench pressing every morning. But
I have no more than 2 of those up on my wall, I promise.
But we also know that, unfortunately, that's not really how football works. I don't know if you've all seen the video of Reece James when they're trying to teach him a bit of yoga in the England camp, and he can't do it. And he's built like a rugby fly half at the moment, and he can't get on the pitch. So I do worry about that a little bit with Eddie, that he might be building his body in a way that isn't necessarily useful for playing 90 minutes or doing it regularly. I
remember when Jack Wilshere kind of made that transformation, by the way, to try to bulk up and seem to lose a little of that lightness, that sort of fast twitch ability that he had to get out of tight spaces. Looked a little lumbering.
It does feel a little bit. I mean, the one thing that I found really interesting with Eddie, and this seems to be something that divides fan opinion. Some people think he's a really good presser. Some people think he's a really energetic presser. Some people think he's dreadful at it. And I watch him, and I really focus on it. I really focus on how he presses, and it's not that he's not running. Do you know what I mean? He's running. He's trying. There seems to be a half a second delay where he's leaning on the wrong foot and doesn't get across quick enough, or he's not quite got whatever Martinelli or Jesus have, where they know where that next pass is going, they know what channel to cross, or and you guys have said it on the podcast a couple of times. We see people running past him. I don't think it's because he's not got the energy or the
right.
or the verve to run. It's not that he doesn't want to. He's not unmotivated. He doesn't seem to be able to read those patterns of where to go. And the thing with Arteta, we've seen Arteta, the way he speaks about Eddie, he loves talking about Eddie. He loves talking about Eddie. And we've seen footage from training ground where he's really on Eddie. And to me, Eddie feels like a project for Arteta. It feels like, you know what it's what women say about men sometimes when they go for the run. It's like, I can fix him. Do you know what I mean? It's like this obsessive, I can fix him. I can do it. Like, everyone else can see the flaws. Everyone is saying, just dump him. And they go, no, I can fix him. That kind of feels a bit like what's happening with Arteta and Eddie. It feels like I don't want to say it's like an arrogant thing from Arteta, because I don't think that's what it is. But there feels like a real insistence of going, I can coach this out of him. And the ingredients are there. The physical ingredients are there. He's strong. He's quick. But there just seems to be something that doesn't, in terms of his off-the-ball play and on-the-ball play, something hasn't quite clicked in terms of doing the one-brain stuff that we need from that number 9.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Paul, and we'll start to wrap up the Eddie conversation. By the way, if people say, why so much Eddie talk? Well, first of all, if you listen to the Arscast, you'll know I wasn't able to glean any Arsenal talk to take away today. There's not a whole lot going on. Secondly, he got his England call up. So I thought we should celebrate that firstly and analyze the player, because if I said to you in the preseason, Eddie Nketiah will start 7 of our first 8 Premier League games, and really almost 8 of 8, he played from halftime in the other one, I think that would be a surprise to most people, and I think it'd be a concern to some and less to others. But he is a prominent player in this team for the start of this season in a way that few would have expected. And Paul, I think Clive has called this out, and Jacob just mentioned it, and I think it is an interesting thing with Eddie. You see the first few games he comes into the team, he's really bright and really good and really contributes. But I think over time, we start to see him struggle to keep that level. So like 2 seasons ago, when he came in for Lacazette, he was like a house on fire when he first came in. And then I think there was a bit of a dip. Last season, he was getting those key goals. He was doing what was needed, but then it started to dip badly enough that Mikel determined he needed to go to Trossard at 9 before Jesus came back. And I think we're seeing a little of that again. And I wonder, do you think it's just about maybe being a player who all the way up until being 24 has essentially been a sub, a limited minutes player? Let's remember, last season he played 1,000 minutes. That was by far the most in his career. Most times it's 800, 600 minutes. Do you think it's simply the fact that the rigors of playing, in some instances, 90 minutes every week, not a cadence he's as used to, and as a result, struggles to maintain the level as he gets a long run inside like he has this season so far?
Yeah, I think there might be a bit of that. Against that is kind of small sample size, and a handful of games in a season versus another season is definitely a small sample size problem. It's probably more explainable by fixtures, who's available in the team that suits him, who's around him. The most intriguing part of it for me is still the fact that, I love Jacob's description of the potential relationship between Arteta and Eddie, but I actually think, and his Jacob's kind of summary of the overall thing, I fully sign up to that. What I would say is Arteta already seems very happy with Eddie. He's like the girl dating the guy. The guy's a bad boy, and he likes a bad boy. Doesn't seem to me like he thinks there's a big mismatch between what he wants from Eddie and what he has from Eddie. And I also think that's an interesting kind of rubric of how you feel about the player. The idea that people are edgy and panicky that it's Eddie instead of Saka for the last, or Saka was out there for Jesus, got shifted, and people are kind of worried about that. And I think Arteta sees it totally different, in the sense that the only thing he cares about is what will the level of the football be? Will he be able to play the kind of football he thinks he needs to beat City? And Eddie's the guy who supports that. And we look at a little bit more the individual contribution, because that's the easier thing to see. The team effects we see some of. We're smart enough to understand that Eddie plays a role, that he's a part of a composite, that he does things to help. But Arteta sees it in a different way, because that's what he feels. The level of football, the style, the ability on the pitch, and Eddie is the best guy for him if he needs to move Jesus to the other side. And so there's always going to be a mismatch between us and Arteta. I'm not smart enough to get my head around it. It's very difficult for us to understand. And it's a bit like the Raya versus Ramsdale conversation. There'll always be a piece of that only Arteta can feel. What impact will it have on the style and the way he wants to play? He likes Eddie more than we do. He likes him even more than I do. I see what Jacob says in terms of the pressing. But I think the way he presses, Arteta is really happy with. I could see more zip. I could see more energy. If you put Jesus out there, he's going to snap into that pressing in a much more aggressive way than Eddie can, especially after 20, 25 minutes. But Eddie's still apparently in all the places, doing all the things that Arteta wants him to do, that supports the way he plays, which is kind of a boring way of looking football. It's a kind of, we'll never quite get it because we're not Arteta, but it seems to be a thing.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how it works out. I mean, ultimately, I think that there's a lot of mileage in the fact that Eddie Nketiah is a squad player who's been thrust into a starting role in a few key moments of seasons, each of the last 3 seasons now, this season, last season, season before, and has acquitted himself relatively well for a player in a squad player role. I think where I feel some of the disconnect is simply that he is a very different kind of player. Maybe we understand him, maybe we don't. It's hard because we've had limited exposure to him, frankly. But Gabriel Jesus averages 55 touches and 32 passes a game. That's what he does. Eddie Nketiah averages 30 touches and 20 passes a game. And that is a significant reduction in involvement. And I think we feel the absence of central occupation rights, feel the absence of those zone 14 entries, feel the absence of what happens when you have a striker who gets those touches. Because what do those touches mean? Sometimes they mean playing out through pressure right from the middle of the park. Sometimes they mean a dribble past a defender that pulls people out of position. Sometimes it means a 1-2 with a Martin Odegaard and you're in. When you're talking about 60% of the touches and 60% of the passes, that's a lot of ball that's going out wide, that's going somewhere else, that's not pulling defenders out of position, that's not helping to counter. So it's a difference. But for me, I'd say it like this. This is the sort of the best way I can summarize my feelings on it. Eddie Nketiah has been far better than I could have ever imagined in the runs he's had in the squad the last 3 seasons. If you go back 2 seasons ago to when he replaced Lacazette and you told me you were going to finish the season with Eddie Nketiah at striker, I would have said it was a doomsday scenario because at that point, Eddie Nketiah had never played really. He'd basically never played Premier League football for Arsenal. And he came in, he did a good job. And then the next season, when we suddenly are surprising title candidates, he comes in January post. What did we all say when Jesus got injured? Title over. Title challenge over. That's it. We have to sign a striker January 1st or the title challenge is over. Eddie Nketiah came in, and by the time he had sort of lost his place in the squad, we were still top, and it actually extended our gap to Manchester City. For a squad player to come in and play striker in that situation and the club to be able to sustain, that's job done. And this season, we're top of the table, and Eddie Nketiah started 7 of 8 games. So, look, my personal feeling, I think we could do better in that position. But you absolutely cannot argue with the results, and results are not everything, but the results of what has happened when our squad player, striker, academy kid, who we should all be behind and be excited about, him thriving, has come in. We've been able to maintain. Do I want him to start the next 7 of 8 Premier League games? No, ideally I don't. Just like Manchester City don't want someone other than Haaland starting, right? And so on and so forth. So I want to congratulate him. I think he is a player that will continue to be, to borrow an Englandism, a Marmite player, because he's never going to be probably quite as good as you'd want from someone who starts at striker, but he's nowhere near as bad as what people make out for a player who's got a role to play in the squad. It's just been a bigger role than maybe anyone would have planned on. We'll have to see what that role turns out to. From your final word on that, Jacob?
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing on it, which is what we're seeing now with Eddie, with Nelson, the decision he made this summer to stay with us, and with Smith Rowe getting trust the process tattooed on him in Spanish, is that we have young academy players who are willing to stick around now, even when the path to first team football isn't that clear. And I suspect, as much as it's because they love living in London, this is their club, they grew up here, they know their way around the gym, I suspect it's also something to do with the fact that we're top of the table, and there's a really good chance we're going to win serious silverware in the next couple of seasons. And that's a nice thing. I think something that Eddie and Nelson and maybe even Smith Rowe would do well to think about is to look at Rob Holding and what's happened there. Because Rob stuck around for a while. Rob stuck around for a while on a decent wage, thinking, he won a trophy with us, probably thought he might win another. I think he left us too late. And I think what's happened now is he's gone to Palace and he can barely get on the pitch. And I think that's because he left it too late. And we had a season last season where his flaws as a player were really shown up. And I think he's now moved on at a stage where it's maybe a bit too late. And who knows what happens to Rob Holding's career now. I think you could make the argument that if he'd have left a couple of seasons earlier, maybe, I know he got injured, but maybe after that Emery season where he was actually playing quite a lot on the left-hand side of a back three, he could have left us with a bit more momentum and gone somewhere and built a better career than what his career looks like now. And I just think that could be a really, we've come into this conversation not wanting to hammer Eddie, but talking about the fact that he's just got an England cap. That is a bit of momentum in his career. He's just started 7 of 8 games for Arsenal. And the one game where he didn't start, he came on and looked like one of the best players on the pitch. We came on as a substitute. His career's got momentum at the moment. And I think personally, as a player, I think he'd be smart to think about if he's going to spend the rest of his career playing second fiddle to Jesus. We're all talking about the fact we're probably going to invest in another forward in the next transfer window or two. I think it's smart to think about when to make that move and not to leave it too late like Holding did.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for Eddie is he's now an England player. He's started a lot of games for Arsenal. I do think there's a lot of rumors about us going for striker, and I think at this point they're probably real. I still think we have one of the best center forwards in the world in Gabriel Jesus. There was an interesting stat going around recently of the goals plus assists from the striker position over the last, I don't know if it was a chunk of seasons, a big chunk of seasons. And he was right there above Kane, above players like that. Gabriel Jesus was per 90. But if we are going for striker, you would think that Eddie would say, I'm in a position for someone to really want to take a big swing on me, given what I've shown. And Arsenal to say we've got a chance to, recover a decent amount of money from this. So it might be the case that both the club and the player have benefited from this. The reason I think it's such an interesting debate and why it winds up being such a difficult one is it is very rare, I think, for an academy player to go through his 20-year-old season having hardly ever played, through his 21-year-old season having hardly ever played, through his 22-year-old season really barely playing. And then at the very tail end of his 22-year-old season, he gets in, and then he doesn't play at all in his 23-year-old season until January. And then suddenly he's in, and now he's sort of playing. There are very few 24-year-olds at the top level of football, which is where Eddie is right now, right? Playing for England, playing for Arsenal, whose most minutes ever in a season is 1,000. That's very rare. And so I think a lot of us still aren't totally sure who he is, right? There's a debate. Like if I said to 100 Arsenal fans, pick the club Eddie Nketiah that would buy Eddie Nketiah, where he could thrive as their first choice center forward, I think the answers would be all over the map. I think you'd have people picking championship sides. I think you'd have people picking Palace. I think you'd have people picking, mid-table Spanish sides. And you have some people picking Brighton, that kind of thing. Where Danny Welbeck, by the way, is currently, well, I was going to say best striker option. There is this guy named Ferguson doing pretty well there. But, it is very rare, I think, for people to have such disparate opinions and such a broad range of expectations for what a player can be. And we find ourselves there with a guy who started 7 of 8 games for us at center forward. But, I think we're going to see plenty more of him this season. Mikel has proven that. And I think there's going to be people that continue to be frustrated when he starts. I'll probably be among them if it's moving Jesus out wide. But I think we just have to get comfortable with the fact that the manager believes he can get whatever he needs from this player such that the team can still play the kind of football they need to play. And what Mikel will be judged on is whether he's right about that. You know what I mean? Because ultimately, he'll start Eddie more until it stops working and costs us, and then people will be mad. Or he'll continue to rely on Eddie when he needs him, and Eddie will continue to deliver. And at some point, the doubters will have to say, hey, it's working. So that'll be an interesting one to continue to track. And I think there will be plenty more opportunity for us to discuss it. I want to talk about a player that's in a slightly different bracket in Declan Rice. I think people might have slightly different opinions about Declan Rice. But before I do that, I think I'd be remiss. I know I'd be remiss if I didn't make the point that if we're going to talk about talent, right, and we're going to talk about acquiring talent and having the right assortment of talent, not questioning the talent you've acquired, but being certain that the talent you've acquired is the correct talent, then you know what you need. You don't need me to tell you what you need. Say it with me. You need Indeed. It's the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. And by the way, like that right there for me is enough with Indeed. Like, I don't want to go to 32 websites to try to do a thing that one website can do. It's the whole point of Indeed is you go there. That's just the one place. They streamline it. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches the job description literally the moment they sponsor a job post, according to Indeed US data. So you want results? You get results. Now, here's the other thing. We should live in a world where you get what you pay for. Not always the case, but Indeed is the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit. To upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed. And last but certainly not least, mental health. Mental health. Oh boy, there's lots of reasons around in the world, in life, where you can feel overwhelmed and anxious, and it can present itself in so many ways. I mean, an ache, a pain, an illness, fatigue, and you don't know what it is because, unfortunately, unlike physical pain, mental anguish is not the kind of thing that necessarily presents itself as clearly. The best way to help, I think, avoid it getting to an acute state is to just work with someone who helps you work through the things that are impacting you in that way. I have done it. I believe in it. I think therapy is one of the great things that we have normalized, or at least begun to normalize in our society, and it gives us a path to being a healthier society overall, especially because social media, I think, has complicated things in terms of being in a good headspace because it's always there. It's always with you. It's always beating you down with thoughts that can take you to a difficult place. And so BetterHelp is a way to do therapy from the comfort of your home, from the convenience of your home, to get on your device, camera on, camera off, so you can do it however is most comfortable for you and match with somebody that suits your needs. It is actual therapy, a licensed therapist. Okay. So I think that is a critical component of it. If you're thinking about giving therapy a try BetterHelp. It's entirely online. You don't have to get in the car. You don't have to drive there. Just fill out a questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, switch therapists anytime if you need to, by the way, because sometimes not a fit. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/vision today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/vision. Paul, is that enough of that?
Indeed.
Nailed it. Okay. Jacob, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be thoughtful in your answer because I know it's not straightforward. Is Declan Rice good at football? We asked the pointed questions here.
I'll go yes with that one.
Okay, good. So now let's drill into this. I was thinking, what could we talk about today? And the thing that came to mind is there's been a lot of ballyhoo around Declan, but I don't think there's really been a hell of a lot of analysis besides, wow, Declan Rice was a £105 million signing from West Ham, playing suffer ball, not exactly Arteta ball. I don't think this was a slam dunk. Some people do. I know we did 2 scouting videos. I had some concerns. I'll confess I had some concerns just about style fit. The one thing you cannot do is get that signing wrong, really. I mean, any signing you get wrong can slow down a project, but given Partey's absences, unavailability generally, the AFCON coming up, all of that, given what we had around him and around the team and what we saw as a flaw last season in terms of the tail end of last season where we just could not stop teams turning us around and finding paths to our goal, Declan Rice was the piece of the puzzle that Mikel Arteta felt was essential. I think Moises Caicedo was the one that was considered. Certainly we know last January was very much considered. So given all of the stakes, to get it this right and look this good, I think is pretty incredible. But let's really dig into this. What about Declan Rice has either surprised you, surpassed your expectations, maybe is still a question for you? Where are you with Declan Rice? Because I have a lot of thoughts on this player and how sensational he's been.
I think he's made us look like a grown-up team. I think he's made us look like a serious team now. I think he's given us something which... It's maybe the less sexy stuff that I think has impressed me the most. It feels like a weird way to talk about essentially a defensive midfielder, but I think with Partey, we had this really strange thing where he was good at the stuff you wouldn't expect a defensive midfielder to be good at. The little drop of a shoulder to just change the picture a little bit and take someone out of the game. The first, second touch, the reverse balls around the corner. And we can talk about that with Rice in a minute, but what Rice has given us in terms of winning second balls, in terms of winning duels, in terms of winning aerial challenges, in terms of that slide tackle he does where he kind of stays on one knee, which means that when he gets to the ball, he can very quickly pass it again. These little things that he's doing like that I've been really racking my brain over the last few weeks trying to think of the last time I saw an Arsenal midfielder that can do that. Maybe Gilberto Silva? I'm genuinely trying to think of the last time we had a dominant defensive midfielder. I want to take defensive midfielder out of it because I think that kind of reduces what he does too much. But like a midfielder who just owns that part of the pitch, and anyone who goes in there, anyone who tries to play a pass through there, anyone who tries to carry the ball through there, he will stop them. I think it's changed us so much. And I think one thing we've seen Arteta trying to do, whether it's with inverting Partey or whether it's with allowing Zinchenko to almost play on the right-hand side of that double pivot, I think what we're seeing at the moment is he's keen to get a ball progressor close to Rice, right? When Rice is playing the six, he seems to really want someone quite close to him who can get the ball forward quickly, who can play through the lines a bit more than Rice can. And at the same time, I think Rice is getting better at that so quickly. Like, genuinely, I think the difference between watching him in the Forest game, first game of the season, to the last kind of little, gap of games between the two international breaks, he's already playing through the line so much better. And it's something that Tim said over the summer about he seems to add something to his game each season, Rice, whether it's the carrying of the ball, whether it's taking shots. This seems to be something that he's doing in real time in front of our eyes, learning to play that ball a bit quicker through the lines, learning to get his head up a bit more, learning to play those lateral passes. And I still think we lack a bit of that. I still think it's something that when Partey especially isn't in the team, we do a little bit more horseshoe. We tend to go around the outsides and not through the middle enough. I will also say, and I don't, we've spent far too much time talking critically about Eddie and Nketiah already, but I do think it's made more difficult when you don't have that pillar that you can hit through the middle. That's one thing that I think I'm really looking forward to seeing Rice have is Jesus being something you can hit in the middle of the pitch, because I think that makes his job a lot easier in terms of those quick balls through. But there's just so many things he's given us, but it's the most dominant that we've looked in midfield at Arsenal in a really, really long time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the interesting thing, Paul, is to look at the slight difference with Thomas Partey. So what's fascinating is, you want to hear an unbelievable statistic? I mean, it's unbelievable to me, and I'm easily amused. I compared Thomas Partey, Paul, to Declan Rice. Thomas Partey last season to Declan Rice this season, because I think that's the better comp, right? Rather than this season. This season wouldn't make any sense. Thomas Partey last season averaged 82.8 touches per 90. You want to take a guess at how many touches Declan Rice averages per 90 this season?
50?
82.8. The exact number the button. Exact number. Now,
fuck off.
You want to hear something incredible? Guess how many? All right, Thomas Partey attempted 72.5 passes per 90 last season. You want to take a guess at how many Declan Rice attempts this
72.5.
season? 72.9. I mean, they are touching it and passing it the exact same amount. The role is identical, at least in terms of its presence as a hub in the team. Where you see some difference, and I think it is fair to point this out, Thomas Partey, 2 extra progressive passes per game, an extra final third entry per game, almost half an extra pass into the penalty area per game. Declan Rice, a higher completion percentage, 91.5 versus Partey's 87.4, as you'd probably expect from a player who's maybe slightly more lateral. Much more switching of play from Declan Rice than Thomas Partey, which is interesting, I think. Interestingly, take-ons, roughly the same, although Thomas Partey more successful at his take-ons, which doesn't surprise me because I think he's a little better in tight spaces with his feet. Progressive carries, though, Rice carrying the ball a bit more, but his carries are quite a bit down from his West Ham days, and I think I can explain that very easily, which is we just have the ball in the attacking third so much more, right? He's not picking it up in the edge of our penalty area and carrying it to the edge of theirs, like at West Ham, where that space was just wide open for him to run into and no one to give it to. I do want to track these stats as they expand over the season, though, because I will say I think Rice was very conservative and safe the first few games of the season and has started to be a little more enterprising with his passing. But in terms of his pitch coverage and getting back and recovering the ball, I do not think that there is any comparison. I really don't. And I know that doesn't show up in tackles per se, but I think it shows up in terms of getting to his spots and shutting down counters. I will also say he's dispossessed fewer times. He miscontrols it fewer times, so we don't get turned on. One thing we know with Thomas Partey, he had some very high-profile losses of the ball last season that turned into goals for the opposition. The West Ham game comes to mind, for example. So, Paul, what do you think of that? Two players touching it the same amount, passing it the same amount, doing it differently, giving us slightly different things in the game. But if I said to you in the summer, we're going to buy a player who can replace Thomas Partey and maybe be an improvement on him, I would have said that is a very difficult thing to achieve. And we seem to have achieved it, in my view.
Yeah, it's amazing the way they line up there. It's almost like he was given the recipe and said, replicate that in your own style. Look, the thing is, comparing anybody to Thomas Partey is which Thomas Partey. Thomas Partey at his best is just a fantastic player. I mean, there was a period last year with Rodri firing, with Partey firing, where it wasn't just Arsenal supporters, it was other folks saying Thomas Partey might be the best midfielder in the league. In the early first half of the season, would have been hard to argue that wasn't a fair conversation. So just depends on which Thomas Partey. But we also know at this stage, you kind of got to accept that's the deal with Thomas Partey. You might get somewhere between a third and a half of a season where he's imperious, which creates the problem that for a third or a half of the season, he's not imperious or available or fully fit. Or whereas Declan Rice basically is built of titanium, along with his friend Ben White, a couple of other players, Gabriel, etc., etc. I think when Pep Guardiola looked at our team sheet this year versus last year, he noticed one thing in particular. Apart from a fit William Saliba, his eye went to, holy crap, Declan Rice in their midfield. That changes everything. I think last year, he's going to look at those two games and always think there's going to be a way, that there will be a weakness that will be good. We'll flatter to deceive, but the craft will eventually come and they'll cut through us. And Declan Rice changes everything. I think that's the midfield with Declan Rice in it. Any competing manager in the upper echelon is going to say, oh, that's a serious midfield. And I don't think you win anything without a serious midfield, a midfield that puts some fear into the other side across 90 minutes. I think the surprising thing for me for Declan Rice, he's very much what I thought he was going to be. But I saw him in two roles. I saw him primarily as the 6 and a little bit of left 8. Maybe that would grow over time depending on who else is available. If you've got a fully fit and firing Thomas Partey, really hard to leave that guy out of your lineup. And so what surprised me is maybe the role I think I saw in the Man City game, which is with the Jorginho and then with the Partey. What have you got with Declan Rice? It's not so much the left 8 the way Xhaka played it. Now, okay, it was a particular opponent in a particular style of game where we were going to battle and win the midfield. But Rice is almost like a free midfielder out of possession. He's basically like those old style mercenaries where who set off to war zones around the world.
Here we go.
Wherever there was a war, there they were. And he's kind of like a free action man. And he would go wherever he needed to be in that midfield, on that pitch. And Jorginho or Partey are the kind of the more positionally responsible screening in front of the back four. And it frees up Rice to go where the mayhem is and come out of it with the ball, to make the tackle, to be wherever the action is, like a mercenary. And like it's almost kind of a composite role. And maybe it's just against the bigger teams you need that. But as a turnover mechanism to generate attack, it's powerful too. It would work against many, many teams to have whoever it is, Jorginho and Rice. And Rice, the problem with him being the 6 and the screen is he needs to be positionally responsible, which he can absolutely do. But he's got so much range and coverage, and he can go everywhere on the pitch and get back in time. It's kind of also a waste. And yet he's not quite attacking enough to do what Xhaka used to do, weird thing to say, and that we're looking for from Havertz. I mean, he can grow into it. I just think there's this interesting composite role, which is ideally suited to a Man City type battle, but it's going to work against other teams too. So that's kind of the surprise for me with Rice. If you free him up a little bit, he'll just go all over the pitch, generating opportunities for those around him by ball winning, turnovers, pressing, and using the full range of his physical gifts to get around the pitch, destroy, win the ball, put us into attack. And the best form of attack, according to Jurgen Klopp, is a turnover. And you can't really argue with it sometimes.
Yeah. By the way, just for anyone who's curious, I got my stats using the comparison tool on FBref, so you can play around with that. If you change the competitions and you change the seasons, obviously you'll get slightly different results. But by and large, you're going to come up with roughly what I did. Jacob, like the long and the short of it is obviously we're just very lucky to have this guy. He's quite fit. I mean, it's a shame he had to come out at halftime of the derby, because I think we go on to win the derby if he doesn't have to come out.
No question.
Jorginho,
no question.
Obviously a hero of the City game, Jorginho, but the villain of the derby, unfortunately, with that error. And if Rice plays, I think we win. It is really interesting because we go from Thomas Partey, who, as Paul pointed out, was a player who at his absolute peak, I think, is as good as any midfielder in the big 5 leagues in Europe. But wasn't at his peak enough and wasn't available enough. And now we go to a guy who seems to have a consistency at that level. And I want to ask you about that. How much do you think that was in Arteta's mind in identifying Declan Rice as a target? Because I think, in a way, if you said you can have the greatest player of all time, but he's only going to be fit for 40% of your games, or you can have someone whose ceiling isn't quite as high, but he is a fit for your 100% of your games, I don't think it's even a difficult choice, because you need to know what you're going to get game in, game out. How important is his consistency and availability? I mean, his ceiling is also incredibly high, but how important is that? Just that feeling that you have a player, much like Bukayo Saka until very recently, that you can just write their name in pen on the team sheet and photocopy it every week because he's going to be there,
Yeah, well, I guess the difference with Saka is the versatility as well, right? As Paul's saying, it could be left 8, it could be at 6. I mean, how incredibly good does it feel as an Arsenal fan knowing that Thomas Partey has already missed so many minutes this season and is going to go to AFCON and is no doubt going to get 3 more injuries before the end of the season, and it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah,
like it genuinely almost doesn't matter. I mean, I think the midfield is the most interesting part of our team right now. We can all name the front 3. I remember when you and I spoke, Elliot, after the United game in the last international break. I think the word I used to describe how I felt about some of the team was unfamiliar. Now that we've got that back 4 backs, Zinchenko, Gabriel, Saliba, White, it feels familiar again. So I think those 2 parts of the pitch kind of feel solid. It's the midfield for me, which is, I often think about City, the way that they do seasons is, it often feels like what they do is this feels like maybe the wrong language to use. They have a problem that they solve in the second half of the season. They have a tactical conundrum that they solve in the second half of the season. And for us, I think that might be the midfield. I still don't know, and I know you guys speak quite well about this, about how we shouldn't obsess too much over starting lineups. I don't really know what the midfield will be, because we haven't seen all of Zinchenko, Partey, Rice, Havertz and Ødegaard fit at the same time. We've seen us invert from the right-hand side when Zinchenko wasn't fit. That allowed us to get Partey and Rice at the base of the midfield together. We've seen us go back to inverting from the left-hand side, and now Zinchenko and Rice form a pivot together. We've just got Partey back fit. Our medical team have followed him to Ghana again to make sure that he stays fit. So it's going to be really interesting to see what we do with that. In terms of Rice, yeah, as you say, it's the consistency, but like what Paul was saying about when he plays the left eight, it's something I noticed in the Community Shield when he played left eight. And suddenly Ederson had the ball, and you look at what's in front of him, and it's Havertz that day. But if you imagine that it's Gabriel Jesus at 9, Saka and Martinelli either side, and then the 8s that are pushing on to press are both Rice and Ødegaard. I mean, they're lucky they've got Haaland to go long to, because how do you play through that? Like, I genuinely think that is the best pressing 5 in the front 5 of pitch that you can have in world football. I can't think of anything better than that. I think there's so much more to come from him in that left 8 position. And there've been a couple of times this season, the Lens game kind of sticks out in my mind, where I think it's been, to use a Paulism, there's been a bit of a toothpaste issue. There's been a bit of a progression issue. I think there has. One thing we've done this summer...
I love you, Jacob. I love you.
I'll reveal the toothpaste T-shirt I've had made for this podcast underneath the jumper at the end. But with Les
there you go, Paul. There's your intellectual property. Stick with that.
Yeah. But one thing we've done this summer, in really basic terms, Partey and Xhaka, Xhaka's obviously gone. Partey maybe has taken a step back out of our starting lineup, and we've put Rice and Havertz in. And one thing the Lens game I felt it, there's been a couple of other times I felt it, is we don't have enough progression centrally. Rice isn't someone who's going to pass centrally, and Havertz is someone who, off the ball, fantastic, and then when we have the ball, he just wants to get in the box. The one thing we've not seen much of him, Havertz, is I thought he'd be a bit more of a creative player than he is. I don't think we're seeing much passing. I don't think we're seeing much passing through the lines. I don't think you're seeing runners say, right, Havertz has got the ball, I better make my run now so he can thread me out.
A lot of wall passes.
Well, I mean, this is a conversation for another day. I think he's a striker. Anyway, what I do think we have to do is find a way of getting someone who can play through the pitch, and I think Rice will learn to do that. But if you were to say that someone else is doing that at the base of the pitch, if you were to say that is Partey, and suddenly Rice is this left 8 player who, I agree with you, isn't going to attack like Xhaka was, in the sense that he's not going to do what Havertz does, just disappear into the box and become a target and pin a centre back and give Jesus a bit more space. But he can carry. That's what you saw in those statistics. He can really carry. And I think he can really pass. And he's got that right foot, which, coming into that left 8 space, he can hit a ball properly. I think there's so much untapped potential. I had a few drinks last night with a pal of mine, and we were sort of doing the age-old conversation of Premier League midfielders. And, it's always... With English fans anyway, it's always Scholes, Lampard, Gerrard, and my pick, and obviously Vieira's in there. My pick is always Yaya Toure. For me, he's one of my favourite midfielders in the Premier League. So dominant, runs through people, and then the right foot to score goals. You can kind of see a bit of that in Rice. Like you really can. The way he runs through players, the way that the pitch just disappears when he starts galloping, and he's got the right foot as well. I think his future in our team is so interesting, because there's going to be so much necessity for him to cover 6, but I think there's so much opportunity for him to grow into that left 8 role. And I think for Rice, arguably for Smith Rowe, for Vieira, because Havertz has had a slightly shaky start and hasn't started in either a North London derby or a game against Man City, there's an opportunity for someone to make that left 8 theirs. And I know Clive spoke about it a lot over the summer. There's so many raw ingredients with Rice that I think could make him such an interesting left 8 in our system.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Look, I think there's more to come from Rice too. I think he has worked really hard to integrate and has tamped down on some of the things he is capable to do. His carry numbers are good, but they're certainly not what they were. I've outlined some reasons why that may be the case. We certainly haven't seen the traction engine leg of his fired up for shots all that often. It's interesting because a feature of last season was Thomas Partey striding onto Ødegaard passes at the edge of the edge of the box, famously in the derby, but a couple of times last season, we haven't really seen Rice get into those positions yet. Paul, I think as we start to wrap up here, one of the things that's really interesting to me is why Mikel went with the lineup he did at the start of the season. This is where I'm willing to be a little controversial. I simply do not agree that Gabriel was benched because of the Saudi Arabia links. I simply do not agree with it. I made this case then, and I'll make it again. You do not bring a guy, if you are benching him because you think his head's turned or something like that, to bring him on under siege down to 10 men is the last thing you do. He trusted him there. You know, he trusted him in some of our most pressurized moments at that time of the season. Gabriel, that is. I really believe that Mikel was trying to coax the best Rice qualities out of Rice while getting the best Partey qualities out of Partey. Now, admittedly, that was a time when Zinchenko wasn't available. And I do think, let's say this about Rice. Rice is definitely in the list of players that could be our best player this season. With Zinchenko on the pitch, he can abdicate a little ball progression responsibility because Zinchenko is so magnificent at it. There was no Zinchenko then. So maybe Mikel saw Partey as the answer to the absent Zinchenko. Timber was supposed to be, of course. And so with no Timber and no Zinchenko, you bring Partey in as a right back. You give him some of his traditional ball progressing capability, responsibilities, and you let Declan Rice do all the things he's brilliant at. And it lets you also, by the way, pick Odegaard and Havertz. You get all of them on the pitch. I don't think that was an accident. I'm curious how you think about that period and what might happen with Partey now being available for selection again with Rice, which basically has not happened since Partey was playing right back. So do you have any thoughts on how Mikel might think about Partey and Rice together? Is it in lieu of Havertz? Is it Partey back to the right back position that everybody loved so dearly? Or is it pure rotation? How do you think he might look at using those two now that really coming out of the international break, they should theoretically both be available for selection for the first time since Partey was playing right back?
Yeah, like the other interesting thing in the summer, apart from what was Gabriel seriously looking at making a move or not, was Partey planning to be here or not? I mean, there was a lot of well-informed conversation around whether Partey was going to make a move out or not. It didn't seem like, and there was interest from clubs abroad. I think the reality was it wasn't of the level of financing we were looking for, or maybe from the player standpoint, not in the regional areas he wanted to display his talents. And so at the end of the window and at the start of the season, we also have Thomas Partey as well as Declan Rice and Jorginho. And so I think we might have had one more player than Arteta was afraid he would have for his midfield. We brought in Havertz as well. I think more as the left 8, but also the 9. I guess we'll see that, the false 9. I guess we'll see that play out of time over time. And we thought we'd have Yuri and Timber, which would give us another option to do certain things, maybe play as a midfielder from time to time. And we were almost in an embarrassment of riches situation. And maybe to some extent we still are. And there isn't an answer to how will it play out. We're going to have a lot of good midfielders, hopefully, who stay fit, and a lot of competitions and a lot of games. And the manager is going to have tactical flexibility. And we've already seen, we started Jorginho against City, Partey not fully fit, but like we matched City with Rice without starting Havertz. There's going to be a lot of potentially interesting variations there. I don't know that we know how it's going to play, but if Partey is fully fit, and like one of the ways you keep him fully fit is by having Rice, by having Havertz, by having these guys, by having Jorginho, by being able to rotate in different competitions, there's a good chance we might see the fittest, most bioavailable Thomas Partey for this season. Because he doesn't play every game. We can dial him back a little bit when he's got a bit of a niggle hovering around the place, mix and match when he has an international obligation. And so, ironically, we might create that dilemma of availability. And we're going to see lots of interesting variations over the season. That might be the one area of the pitch, as Jacob says. I was going to Jesus him there, as Jacob says.
Jacob.
Yeah, where like you have no clue what the best 11 is, because that's not a thing. It's how we're feeling it, different look. Arteta's talked a lot about tactical flexibility, surprising the opposition, all these kinds of things. And yet last season, everybody knew, they knew what our starting 11 was if fit.
Yeah.
This season, the midfield could be anything.
Yeah, and the flexibility is staggering. I think, by the way, I know we have just a little bit of echo situation with Paul's mic. We're going to fix that for next time. I think I know what the problem is, so we'll definitely get that sorted out. But I would say there's also just scope for enjoying this. Like, this is the dominant central midfield in the league now. I mean, you want to put Rodri in there, be my guest. He's sensational. But this is the other one. And he's going right into the prime of his career. He pretty seamlessly, effortlessly slotted in at Arsenal. He looks the part. He's been magnificent. We go up against City, and some of the big moments of the game come from him, right? That retreating tackle that he makes from behind to save a counterattack. He could have, Martinelli hits it right at Ederson, and I'm not saying that it was an easy chance, but that knee slide ball recovery where he then plays the left-footed through ball to Martinelli, like he turned that game like he turned so many games. I think he is probably the best midfielder in the league. Rodri might be able to say he's the guy just because he's playing for the treble holders, but like it is an extraordinary thing to have this player. And Jacob, as a final thought on this, just I don't think the fan base necessarily, I hate that word, but I'm going to use it, has fully, completely appreciated just how lucky we are that we have this player and how unbelievable it is. I mean, it is a complete seismic shift in midfield power in the league that we have this player now. And Thomas Partey was sort of meant to do that for us. And at his absolute best, he did. But lack of availability and sort of variability in his level, I think, has held it back from being quite that. But in Declan Rice, we have someone that can control that area of the pitch for years to come. And it's rare that you go this big on a transfer. We'd certainly never done it. It's even more rare, actually, that you go this big on a transfer and it works this well. Those big transfers tend to be a coin flip. We're just very lucky to have him. I'm so excited to see where this goes.
I mean, it feels un-Arsenal, doesn't it, what we've done with Rice? This feels like what Manchester United used to do. It's
such an Alex Ferguson thing. Yeah, just go buy the best player in the league.
Well, and the English one as well. And I mean, look, he has every right to be the next England captain. He's a talisman, and I think the Partey comparison is so interesting because I think you could argue that Thomas Partey might be the more talented footballer. He certainly isn't anywhere near as good an athlete, but Rice is a talisman. I read a really interesting thing actually. Do you know Badly Drawn Arsenal, the Twitter account?
Poorly Drawn Arsenal, yeah.
Poorly Drawn Arsenal.
Also a Jacob, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yes.
I saw he posted something. He posted something over the summer. And I was listening to you talk then, Paul, about Partey, and I think it's so interesting what you're saying about how essentially only now that we're talking about taking him out of the team are we now managing him correctly, doing exactly what Atletico Madrid used to do, and we might actually see the best of him now. And who knows, we might even end up talking about new contracts by the end of the season. I remember Paulie John Arsenal saying he's never once had someone ask him to draw Partey. And I've done sort of football content bits in the past where, as an Arsenal fan, I've said to supporters of other clubs, I think Partey might be the best six in Europe, and they've laughed at me because he's inconsistent and because so much of what he does isn't what you expect a six to do. Rice is the complete and utter opposite. So consistent, so loud with what he does on the pitch. Everything he does is so big, He often looks like the biggest player on the pitch, and I know he's not the tallest player on the pitch, but there's something about his presence. He also seems to race out of the dressing room at every opportunity to do an interview. Every time it's Monday Night Football. I mean, we could not be playing and he'd somehow end up doing the post-match interview on Monday Night Football. He loves it. He's a proper talisman. It reminds me of the Van Persie to United transfer in some ways, of going, we've got a hole on the pitch somewhere. For United, it was a striker. Let's just buy the best one in the league. And that's exactly what we've done. And I think you're right. I don't think as a fan base we've quite accepted how big this is or how big it could get. He's still so young. And I think it's important with players to think about miles on the clock, but also tactically, what are his miles on the clock? What's he been taught? How much time is it? And he was at pains over the summer to tell anyone who'd listen how much he's learning at Arsenal and how much he wants to grow and how much he's taking in from the manager. This guy's ceiling is unbelievable. Like, it really is. As an athlete, there's nothing he can't do. He's faster than we think he is. He's stronger than we think he is. And he looks after himself unbelievably well. Tactically, where he could go, this guy, I mean, we talk about the superstars in this team. We talk about Ødegaard being one of the top players in the league. We talk about Saka potentially being one of the best right wingers in Europe. I don't think we're talking enough about what Rice is and what Rice could be in Europe. Like, is there a player with his physical profile who has the abilities he has at that age, who has shown that keenness to learn and develop? He could be anything. It's unbelievable what he could do.
And what it does, I mean, when you connect that up to what we built, in terms of our spine, it makes us such a solid team. I have to say, I loved the Arsene Wenger years. It's what forged me as an Arsenal fan. But there were those years, right, where we were the poorly drawn horse meme in reverse, right? We were a hell of a lot of fun to watch, but we were not a serious football team in terms of what we allowed at the other end. And now you put William Saliba, I think the best young center back, but maybe you just take the word young out of there. He's in the conversation, but the best young center back in the world. And Gabriel Magalhaes next to him, who's criminally underrated, but right up there. And you put Rice in front of them. And you're a serious football team right down the middle of the park. And no one's going to come into that area and bully you and body you and win the physical battle. And that gives you, the phrase earn the right to play is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. And a player like Declan Rice lets you earn the right to play. Don't come in here. Don't try to attack this space. And while I think Thomas Partey's little flicks and shimmies and moves in tight spaces, we saw how devastating it could be against City in the game 2 Januaries ago, which didn't quite go our way when he was the best player on the pitch. But the way Declan Rice does it, there's a seriousness about how we approach games, and it lets those other players have a platform to go do the things that those players the fun players should do. And by the way, we should mention, to your point, Jacob, the fact that he is a talisman, the fact that he is a star, the fact that he will go take every interview, it's a little weight off Bukayo Saka's shoulders. It's a little weight off Gabriel Martinelli's shoulders. It's a little weight off Martin Odegaard's shoulders. These other young players who might otherwise be thrust, I mean, Saka in particular, thrust into such a white-hot spotlight. And Declan Rice being willing to go out in front up to the cameras and be the guy that takes the interviews and be a superstar England player. Just a little bit of a burden off of someone like Bukayo, who was otherwise carrying so much of it.
And how many penalties have we got this season?
5.
With an English player going up to the referee for once, when we've watched Harry Kane do that for years at Spurs. Who knows whether that's helping.
A future England captain potentially being hacked down for a penalty in Saka, a future England captain potentially in Declan Rice going to the referee asking for a penalty. I mean, it's the little things that make a difference, and it's pretty hard to argue with 5 penalties that some of that is tactical, some of it's about where we are on the pitch, and maybe some of it is about relationships, so to speak. I think you could say it like that. Let's leave it there. I think the answer to my question, though, is Declan Rice good at football? Yes. Yes, he is. He is ours, and he is very, very, very good at football, and I think there's a lot more to come. Paul's on Twitter, Paul's my pants. Thanks, Paul.
Oh, breaking news, Elliot. Wasn't there some breaking news on 59 Minutes?
Oh, breaking news on 59 Minutes. You're not going, you know what? We'll save it for the next episode. You're going to have to listen to Thursdays also. We play Chelsea football on Saturday. Is it Saturday or Sunday? Saturday, isn't it? Yeah.
Saturday.
That's going to be another big game coming right out of the international break. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed everyone comes through the next set of fixtures. Okay, we'll do the Tony and Neto scouting video tomorrow. We'll do a Chelsea preview on Thursday, and we'll have a special rolling piece of content on Friday for patrons. And if you want to be over there, we'd love to have you over there. But certainly just being over here is good enough. Looking forward to seeing people out for maybe a night of some drinks and for a football match when Sheffield United weekend, which is not this weekend, but the one after, around the 28th, 29th, that time. So lots of fun stuff ahead. Jacob, always a pleasure to talk to you. Look forward to talking to you throughout the season. Jacob's on Twitter at Hawley Jacob. And I know you wanted to mention something. Sorry, I almost forgot, but you wanted to mention a cause that is important to you, and I want to give you a chance to tell everybody about it. So why don't you let people know?
Yes. So I've sort of mentioned already on the podcast that I live in North London. There's a little girl who's a friend of a friend. Her name's Nancy. She's 4 years old. And a few months ago, she unexpectedly went into hospital and stayed there for a very long time because she has a autoimmune problem called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which rarely affects children. She deteriorated quite a lot. Lost use of her legs and arms. She is making a bit of a recovery now. She's out of hospital and she's managed to start school. But the next few months are going to be really crucial in terms of the physiotherapy that she's doing to make sure that she has full use of her body. So I will tweet this out as well. There's a GoFundMe page to help her and her family access that physiotherapy. And I think we can stick it in the program notes. Can we, Elliot?
Yeah, I'll throw it in the show notes for everybody as well. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
It's a really important cause. It's a really lovely family in the area. And I think this is something that as an Arsenal community, we do so well as helping these causes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. So we'll throw that in the show notes. And with that, we'll leave it there. Jacob's on Twitter. Hawley, Jacob. Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for getting through it. Look, you didn't learn about dump trucks on this episode, but you did learn that Declan Rice is good at football. So I would say, we covered our bases. We will come up with more nonsense to fill the break. We love you. And we will talk to you after Arsenal 10. Chelsea, no.